What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Altar again, and this time we return with Chuck Billy of the Almighty Testament. Thank you for coming back on the show today, man. Great to have you here as
Thanks
always.
thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it's always great to have you here. We are getting a remastered new lease of life with The Legacy and The New Order. It's so great because, I wasn't even born yet when these albums were made, so it's great to sort of like be able to sort of like quasi witness the release of these albums or like the closest things to it. Do you think that these albums do have sort of like new meaning in a way being seen now in 2024 as opposed to 87 and 88?
Well, first of all, the way they sound, definitely, because, that was our first record, first couple of records. We didn't know much about making records, didn't know much about the studio experience. We just left it all to the engineer and them to try to get the best of what we did back then. And so, and of course, when it came out, we loved it. It's like, great, we got a record. Look, our first album, it's on a vinyl finally, and over the years making records, over years of the process and the equipment getting better, studios understanding the procedure a little better, our records have definitely gotten better over the years. So when we revisit those records, we listen to them, especially when they're played on the radio or something. They're just so compressed and small. I'm like, wow, man. I remember back then they were so great, but now what happened?
Right?
So we've always said, God, I wish we could make them sound, like today, the technology we have today to kind of improve those. And of course, we couldn't find the original 2-inch master, so we couldn't remix it. So I had found half-inch unmastered recording tapes of the mixes. So we took those and went and remastered it. And after 35 years, bands, you retain the rights of your records. So those records are 37, 36, Practice What You Preach is 35 years coming up now this year. We retained the ownership back of them. So I remember in 2000, we asked Atlantic if we could get and remix some of these records, and they didn't cooperate, unfortunately. So we decided, let's just go in and re-record them. I know we can make them sound better, so that's why we did First Strike Still Deadly. And that was kind of what brought Alex back to the band and the reunion of the original band back in '05 or '01, but '05 we finally started doing some stuff together. So, now that we retain the Legacy and New Order and we own it, in the US, they still have the rights in Europe. We were working with Nuclear Blast, gave it to them, and so let's remaster them, let Nuclear Blast do their thing and get them out to the world. And so me and Eric went back to Nashville and got to sit down and listen the difference of the remaster, and it was like night and day. We took off that compression that we just hated so much and let them breathe a little more. And we're pretty happy with the way it came out. I wish we could have remixed, but we couldn't do that.
Well, it's really great to hear, like, because there's been a lot of bands. Like, I know that Dio's been doing, or, Wendy Dio's been doing that with a lot of Dio's material where, like, they bring the modern twist to it. Because I had a conversation with a couple of artists about this. Being a millennial metalhead like myself, I got into metal through the Avenged Sevenfolds and the Disturbs and Kill Switches and whatnot. And I was talking with an artist about it, and he said that because a lot of us grew up with like the production of like those bands, that when we sometimes go and revisit, early material, not to discredit the genius behind it, but like it's a little harder for us to digest because it doesn't feature that sort of production on it. So I think it's really good to, some people say, oh, that's not as organic as it used to be, you're cheating with all those unique tools, but I think it's just bringing a new lease of life for a younger generation to discover it.
Well, totally. And those records, we played a lot of it live. We're in there doing it. Where today, you take tracks and record them and layer them, and there's a lot more effects you can put on stuff, so records sound bigger and more produced. So yeah, I mean, it's real, it's raw, it's still what we did back then. It's just sounds a little better.
Yeah.
And it's exciting that we own it and that we get to like say, okay, Atlantic, guess what? We get to put it to the world again.
Damn right.
With or without you.
That's got to be the greatest way to fight the music with the music. But when you revisit those lyrics and when we listen to the Legacy and New Order, does it almost put you back? Like, did it almost kind of put you back in the state of mind of who Chuck Billy was in 1987? Or being that, so much has happened between then and now, maybe you have like you interpret it a little bit differently, or maybe you don't feel the same way and would word things differently, or so on and so forth?
No, I think it brings us right back to that point because, of course, the New Order, well, I wrote one song on the Legacy I participated, but the New Order is where I really got to put my input with lyrics and vocal style and stuff. And it does take us back to that day. And that's why now in these tours this year, we're actually playing the Legacy New Order album, a combination set of that, just to, for the moment while these are being shared and people are listening to them, we thought, let's go out and play those live. So from this next month, when we start in Europe, all the way to the end of the year, we'll be playing Legacy New Order songs. And about those songs, they're like riding a bike. We went to the Milwaukee Metal Fest last month, and we didn't even need to rehearse because we know those songs so well, and we're tight. It clicks. Every time we'd like, okay, we got to go practice these. We get to the rehearsal room, the first day, we're like, we don't need any more practice, guys. We got these. We know these. It's like, I don't need my teleprompter as you see it sitting back there. I don't need that. I just know the words. They just come back, even though I haven't sang them or reviewed them or even listened to those records for so long. It just comes back,
And I always said that music, like an artist's catalog, is always the best representation of how time is relative as well. Again, so being born in 93, I discovered Testament around when I was a teenager, like 15 or 16. So like my first Testament album was the Formation of Damnation. More Than Meets the Eye was my first Testament song. And then I went back and listened to everything. So the Legacy doesn't take me back to 1987. It takes me back to 2010. More or less, and the same for New Order. So I think it's cool that like now a lot of the younger fans get to really experience this material with the way that they interpreted it. You're going to hear fans at these shows being like, man, it feels good to be back in the 80s again, and you hear a millennial say it feels good to be back in 2009 again, or something like that.
Well, it is, because when we did that Metal Fest, a lot of fans were happy that we were playing those records. And we did a show, I believe, in LA. We played with the Machine Head and Fear Factory and bands like that. And we played that set, and for those guys to come out going, dude, it was so cool and good to hear those songs again live. Wow, it brought us back, So that generation of them, revisiting it. So a new fan, I guess, unless you're a real metal enthusiast and the history of thrash metal, kind of the Bay Area thing where it started Metallica, you kind of go back and want to visit that and see what that's about in those bands from the Bay Area back then. And, I think like the release we did, me and Eric dug in our archives, boxes we haven't opened up for a long time, and found photos. I found the original contract, original merch agreements, all original lyric sheets, all this stuff. I'm like, what? This would be really cool to put in it. So we put a nice booklet, like I think it's a 20-page booklet that comes with it, that goes back and revisits us, those photos in the studio. It has our original record deal. It even has our lawyer send in a letter to Megaforce saying, hey, I managed this band Testament, our Legacy at the time. Here's a demo tip. If you have any interest, contact me. I mean, all cool stuff of where we started and how, we were fortunate enough to have Johnny Z at Megaforce and Maria Ferrero really push that and get us onto the label. And that really kicked off and has put us in the right place amongst the right bands, Metallica, Anthrax, MOD, SOD, all these bands back then. We were put the right spot at the right time.
Yeah, and a huge shout out and rest in peace to Johnny and Marcia Zazula as well, who were really just the great faces of heavy metal. And I also want to give a shout out to Maria Ferrero, who, you had given me one of my first shots working in press as well. So shout out to Maria as well. There was one anniversary I also wanted to talk about, and that this year marks 30 years of Low, which I feel like is a record that isn't discussed enough about. Now, I think Low is a fantastic, super underrated Testament album, but when you put that album out, a lot of people say metal was, this was a time where they said metal was dead and whatnot, but at the time, Pantera was still on top of the world, and you guys also still maintained your heaviness in a way as well. So did you sort of feel like a little bit of the grunge and how that impacted metal, or was that really not something that affected you too much?
No. It was felt big time because you got to remember we had a 6-record deal. Low was the final record for Atlantic, the 6th record, and before that was The Ritual, which is when we kind of split up. Louis and Alex left because we're growing apart musically, and Alex wanted to explore more jazz and things like that. And we noticed literally at the time, we were with Atlantic and they had A&R peoples who, give us that radio song, give us that song for radio. And there was a lot of just AM, FM stations that were playing metal, not just the midnight show. There was like drive time metal shows going on. And I would say there's at least 100 and something stations across the country that were doing it. And soon as Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, everybody kind of started making waves, making records very cheap, where, the major labels were spending a lot of money on videos and making records. These bands were coming out, making records very cheap and making something new. And the radio really grabbed it, and it was really accepted well and was received well and heard on radio. And literally, I'd have to say in 6-month period, right around that time, there was down to like 30 stations that were still playing metal, and they were dropping off like flies, are transitioning to a new format. And so it really did die overnight. And we knew that, okay, this is our last record. Alex and Louis is gone. We're pissed off at the world. We're on a rolling well, and now things have changed, So that's kind of why Low, we said, you know what? We're going to write something a little harder than heavier that's definitely probably not even going to have a chance at radio, and create this record Low. And so songs on that like Dog-Faced Gods, was a song that I really let my kind of a death voice back then sing throughout the whole song. Where before that I would kind of just use it here and there within the songs. And so that record really was our like farewell to Atlantic, farewell to radio. Let's go back. Me and Eric, first thing we said, dude, we could be heavy again. And that's kind of what set the pace, doing that record. And then we did shortly after that, I think right around that time, we started our own label. And ever since then, we've been licensing our music, through our own label. Yeah. And it took a little time to get momentum and get comfortable. We did the Live at the Fillmore record in between that. And then we did The Gathering. And that's what really kind of set us up and was, I believe, was a new life for Testament, starting from The Gathering in 2000. The songs, the style, we incorporated more blast beats in the drums and something that was happening more in the underground metal scene. And we kind of latched on that. Eric's a big black metal fan, so we started incorporating that into the style in that record. And I think from that point on, we kind of, at 2001, of course, I got sick with cancer. That kind of slowed down the momentum. And I literally in 2002 thought, after beating cancer, I lost all my hair. I lost my eyebrows. I was just, I was on a steroid. I really ballooned up. And I'd look in the mirror and go, that's not the person I know. And I was really focused on just getting better, spending time with my family. So I really thought Testament was over at that time, and didn't know what was going to go on, what the future held, especially for metal. But there was a lot of, like you said, Panteras and a lot of new bands still grinding, making waves and making, names for themselves, and really still kind of opening doors for us.
Yeah.
And then so when we had the reunion, when Alex and Louie and Greg all came back, we in '05 we did some touring in Europe. It was only supposed to be like 5 shows, and it turned into 10, and then it turned into a year. And then 3 years went by, and we're like, you know what? We never wanted to talk about making a record or talk about what the future has for this band. We just enjoyed the moment and played. But then it came a time and says, you know what? Why don't we write a record together? And that's kind of where the formation thing came along. And we all said, okay, let's make a record. And it was a good record. And we were like scared that, oh man, how are we going to beat The Gathering? And then we went into every record like, oh, how are we going to beat Formation? And then Dark Roots. And then how are we going to beat Dark Roots? And then Brotherhood and all these records. And I think we kept that momentum and kept trying to challenge ourselves. But I know when we had the reunion and we were playing, there was always been like a sense of competition and always seeing what your peers are doing and wanted to be up with it and be recognized. But there was something about that after beating cancer and having a chance. I looked at it as like, wow, I'm just feeling really blessed. I'm getting an opportunity to play music again with the original guys. Wow, this is cool. Maybe we can, end this together, whatever the career is we have. Maybe we can end this together. And we really started writing for ourselves, not worrying about the critics or the fans. We wrote as a team of guys that were lucky enough to get back together and make music. And I think that's what really kind of set the tone at that place going forward.
Yeah. Well, what I think has always made Testament such a unique band, especially in the realm of thrash, and first off, you're still making, I think, some of the greatest music now, because I still think Children of the Next Level is, without a doubt, in my top 5 Testament songs ever. And I think Brotherhood of the Snake is still just up. I still play that like it was released yesterday. But what I think is so incredible about Testament is you have a lot of bands from the Bay Area, whether they're singing about fuck the system and fuck authority, or, they're singing about, the darkness of man and all that. But I think one thing that makes Testament so extraordinary is there's such an essence of self-reflection in your music as well. I think that there is, when you're telling people practice what you preach, like that is something that people need to hear. I feel like your music tells people what they don't want to hear sometimes, but in a very metal way, and that causes people to sort of take that self-reflective mentality. Some people's music forces people to headbang. Some people forces people to throw down in the pit. Your music, with the same heaviness, forces people to look withinward. I do consider Testament to really be almost kind of like the thinking man's thrash band.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I think Alex Skolnick probably has a lot to do with it. He's a really smart guy and really self-conscious about the world, what's going on in our world. And, like the Legacy, New Order, a lot of those were, especially the New Order, we really are fascinated with Nostradamus and predictions of the world, what's going to happen to our planet. And it's funny, here we are, 30-something years later, and those things have happened. The planet, climate change, all these things we talked about and wrote about we're living.
Yeah.
And we really started writing songs that had to be real, that you could touch. Things that had meaning, and people would have to interpret it with the way they live their life and the way they interpret the lyric with what's going on in their world. And I think we've always kind of stayed with that. We haven't really, Eric's really leans like, let's write about, black metal and, going to the graveyard and, skulls and demons and stuff. And I'm like, that's cool and all, every now and then. But to me, I sing, I guess it's more positive when I sing with the message. I really feel I have more conviction in what I'm doing and singing, than instead of just telling us a story that's not real, or it's like a dream or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Do we have a little bit of time left? I just have a few more questions if that's
cool. Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Depending on what you are singing about, though, depending on if it is something more personal or if it is coming from, Eric's mind of madness, if you will, depending on what is coming out of your voice, does that maybe resonate with you differently depending on what the lyrical meaning is about? Does it feel like you channel a different energy depending on the subject matter?
Well, I do, because, I'm a Native American, and I kind of, we wrote one song, early in our career, but I really didn't like focus, like I need to put some more Native stuff. But after I got sick with cancer, I went to see three healers and really went through this whole Native American healing process with them. I don't know if you ever read those stories, but I had some wild things happen to me that I believed helped me get through the cancer. Like our last record, I wrote a song about healers, and that's about all the medicine men I sang when I was getting better. When I lost my father, the afterlife, I wrote that, let my father know I'm going to see you again someday. So all these things were real things that happened to me and could happen to anybody and do affect everybody. And it's like when you're going to write a song, it's like, okay, there's so much going on in our world, especially today. It's like easy to find things to write about. And the last couple records, I was kind of fascinated about aliens and were we created by aliens and alien abductions. So it's really kind of writing these, could be true, we don't know, but they still have a good way to build a story on that stuff where it still could be, not real.
Yeah.
So I lean in, especially on this record, I still do that. There's a couple songs we've done, like Children Next Level, a song like that, about that whole, movement, I forgot what they're called, but I went down to LA to the Museum of Death, and they had a whole display.
Oh, did I lose you?
In the suits and wearing their little badges saying, the away team and stuff, So these are things I've seen that inspired me,
Yeah, and inspiration is like water and air. It really is everywhere. And you led me perfectly into the next question, actually. Kind of like a debate I have with artists in a way. Do you believe inspiration is something that could be sought out? Do you feel that inspiration is something you could go out and look for? Or do you believe like you have to kind of just let it strike you?
I let it strike me, or if I'm watching something, I get interested in it, then I'm thinking, how can I explain that in a metal way a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, definitely inspiration. And I've been working and writing with a guy, Del James, for over 20 years. He used to be the chief editor of Rip Magazine back when Rip Magazine was around, and we became great friends. And I've wrote with him and Steve Souza from Exodus. We've been writing songs for a long time as well. And I like doing that because I'll have an idea and I don't really get my message out the way I want the words to be interpreted. So I use them to kind of, here's my story, here's what I'm thinking, how can we tell this story to make sense and be interpreted by a metal fan reading, going, oh wow, just the way you phrase it, or some cool words here and there, or that's the way I work today. Like right now we're working on a record, and I'm going to LA to work with Del on Monday and Tuesday, write a couple songs.
Yeah, and I can only imagine.
And we're almost done with the record. The record is going to be killer this year. It's so funny because we're in a full circle right now in Testament, because there's so many new bands making their names, a lot of new upcoming bands playing killer thrash and aggressive vocals and screaming and death vocals, and I get inspired by that stuff. Some people go, oh, man, they're a 30-year-old band, what are they going to do? But I'm inspired by these younger bands, what they write, what music style they're creating, and it does to Eric too. And I think people are really going to see in this next record how that affected me and Eric, because there's some it's going to be a killer record, dude.
I got to tell you, it's funny because I interviewed Eric right when we entered the pandemic. I believe this is when, and I'm sorry to bring it up, but when you got diagnosed with COVID. I think I was supposed to interview at that time, and then I asked Kristen at Nuclear Blast, being like, yeah, I'll talk to Eric instead. I'll leave him alone. But like, we were just promoting Titans of Creation, and I even said to myself, like, I'm honestly just excited to see what the next Testament album is going to be, because within the last 4 years, I mean, we've taken quite the deluxe cruise of Schitt's Creek. So, like,
oh yeah, it's very well. We brought on a new drummer, Chris Dovis. He's 25 years old. new young blood. He's really into new modern, what's going on today. He's got his finger on the pulse, and he's brought that to the band, right? It's like a new breath of fresh air he's bringing to us. But people will see in the music, he's probably one of the top drummers we've had in Testament, and he's a young kid, but he's an old soul.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy he's with us.
Yeah. Sorry, they're doing construction outside my apartment if you're hearing that background noise. Beauty of living in the middle of Manhattan. But I have two more questions for you, and that is about the evolution of Testament too, because there's no denying that there is a constant evolution between the Legacy and Titans of Creation. I don't consider Titans of Creation to be a continuation of Brotherhood of the Snake or Brotherhood to be a continuation of Dark Thirst. It's just a continuation of your evolution. Is evolution or growth, is that something you really have control over? Can you dictate your own evolution, or does it just kind of have to happen while you're not even realizing it?
I think it's got to happen, but in a sense, especially, I get my new metal turned on to bands by listening to Sirius Radio. So a lot of bands will come out like, oh, I never heard of these guys. Who's this? And then I'll listen and go, wow, okay, I better pay attention. So yeah, it does subliminally put that in my brain that, there's a lot of new bands and a lot of new young generation of metal fans that maybe heard of Testament, but, it hasn't been exposed to us. So unless you go back and review our past, so I think, like some of the newer records, I think we've always wrote a record, especially, last 5 records, that keep evolving sonically and I think keeping up to the times to still sound maybe modern. But our next record, I think, is really taking a step into where I think maybe fans and even our older fans that go, yeah, I grew up with Testament, go, wow, what are those guys doing right now? Wow, but I'm excited for it. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, definitely. And the final question I wanted to ask you is, I've seen Testament live numerous times. It's always just a great experience. And watching how you just bring the audience with you, they feed off of you, you feed off of them. Being a front man is truly remarkable. Now, when you are in the studio, because I've always said that a Testament album feels like I'm listening to it live because of the energy, but when you're in that vocal booth and you're in the studio and it's a very static and rather controlled sort of environment, how do you sort of replicate that intensity and that energy that you would bring on stage in a studio? Do you almost have to kind of like go somewhere else in your head?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because when we make records, we really don't have a lot of time to practice them. We're not a band of go, okay, let's take 2 months and rehearse these songs. We create them and write them, especially me vocally. I'm always the last one. The song is written and then I'm putting lyrics to it. And then I go to the studio and lay it down and have to be happy with it. And then I think after living with it, and then we get to rehearse, that's when I think the songs even come more alive, is in the live experience, because they are more intense. I know the words better. I know the phrasing better. It's more comfortable to sing live. Some songs I put in the studio, I go, man, I don't know if I could pull that off live, but it takes some practice to be able to do that. And just over time, being repetitive, and just like anything, you go lift weights, the more you lift, the stronger you get. I think vocally and as a band, the more you play something and do it together, the stronger it gets, the more comfortable it gets. And then eventually you're like, okay, that's easy now,
Yeah, fair enough. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time. And as always, thank you for just continuing to gift us with your amazing music that really just opens our minds, opens our souls, and opens up our horns. Is there just anything else with Testament you'd like to promote with the new music in the works? Anything going on that you're allowed to talk about at this time, of course?
Well, I mean, Practice What You Preach coming up here in August, so we're focusing on getting that out with Nuclear Blast here eventually. I don't know, this year or next year, but we've been sitting around for 6 months now. We're just excited to get back on tour, get this record done, get out there and just keep going. We're very fortunate to be able to do this. We're not spring chickens. This music's keeping us young at heart and young in our minds. And we're just very fortunate to be here still.
Yeah, and we're very fortunate to have you. But thank you so much. Everybody, Chuck Billy of the Almighty Testament. New stuff coming very soon. We'll see you next time on Heavy New York.
Yeah, thank you.